Quería preguntarte, ¿qué opinas de eso? Ah, no lo había pensado. These tiny phrases can transform your Spanish from sounding robotic to something that flows naturally. Today we're going to learn 10 of what Benny Lewis calls conversation connectors. These are little phrases that don't mean much by themselves, but they keep our conversations flowing naturally. In this video, we'll focus on a few connectors that you can use in almost any situation. These are going to help you gather your thoughts, steer conversations gracefully, and even ask for clarification the way that a native Spanish speaker would do it. You can download the full set of conversation connectors using the link in the description of this video. These were all written by our native-speaking Spanish coaches at LearnCraft Spanish, so you'll know that you're practicing true, authentic Spanish. Just grab them using the link in the description. Also, quick shout out to Benny Lewis, whose blog post inspired this video. I'll link that in the description as well. All right, let's dive in and learn these 10 connectors. Let's start with how to ask a good question. Sometimes one of the hardest parts of speaking Spanish is just getting the conversation started. So let's practice 2 conversation connectors that'll help you ease into a conversation by politely asking a question. The first one is quería preguntarte, which literally means I wanted to ask you. Here's why this is so handy. So let's say that you're at dinner with your in-laws and you want to ask your brother-in-law something about his work, but you don't just want to ask it, because that would be too blunt. Normally, in English, you wouldn't just say something like, Jose, do you still work at the hospital? Instead, you might say something more natural like this. Jose, I wanted to ask you, do you still work at the hospital? In Spanish, this would be, Jose, quería preguntarte, ¿todavía trabajas en el hospital? This sounds much more casual and natural than just diving straight into the question. Next, let's learn a conversation connector you can use to ask someone's opinion about something. Just start like this. ¿Qué opinas de? So let's say you want to ask Jose's opinion about a movie that you've both seen. You would say, ¿Qué opinas de esa película? So notice that this is very different from just asking, did you like that movie? Or ¿Te gustó esa película? If you did that, he could just answer yes or no. If you instead start with ¿Qué opinas?, you get to open up a more thoughtful discussion. So both of these are great ways to start a conversation or to gently steer the conversation toward a topic that you like. This is so much better than sitting in awkward silence or wondering what to say next or robotically jumping into a simple question. All right, next let's learn some conversation connectors for sharing your opinion. Imagine that Jose just answered your question. How do you keep that back and forth flowing naturally? We'll learn 3 conversation connectors that are natural and flexible responses. You can drop these into all kinds of conversations. First of all, let's say that Jose says something that you totally agree with. You'll want to be able to respond with enthusiasm. You can say, Estoy totalmente de acuerdo. This literally translates to, I totally agree. This is a great way to connect with someone over a shared idea. And it also helps keep the conversation flowing. So you can start with Estoy totalmente de acuerdo, and then you can follow it up with more thoughts on the same topic. All right, next one. What if Jose says something that you hadn't thought of before? You can respond, No lo había pensado. This literally means I hadn't thought it, or I hadn't thought of it. And this one is perfect when someone surprises you with an idea. You're responding in an authentic way, plus you can be thinking about what to say next. So while you're saying this phrase, no lo había pensado, it buys you a few extra seconds of thinking time without awkward silence. All right, how about a third option? Let's say you don't really agree with their response. Maybe you want to politely share an alternative perspective. You can say, Entiendo tu punto, pero this literally means I understand your point, but... So once again, this is polite and natural. Plus, notice that once again, it buys you a little bit of time. If you memorize this phrase and practice throwing it into conversations, you can give your brain a few seconds to breathe while you say that thing and while you're thinking about what to say next. So these 3 connectors are all great ways to help you share your opinions with the people that you're talking with, whether you agree with them or you have a different point of view. All right, next let's imagine that you want to move the conversation in a new direction. These next 2 conversation connectors are going to help you pivot a conversation in a natural way. Imagine you're still at that dinner table and your in-laws start talking about a hot topic that they don't all agree on. And maybe you want to share a more nuanced perspective that's a little bit different from theirs. In English, you might say, "The thing is, it's more complicated than that," and then proceed to explain. So the really handy connector here is that first phrase, "the thing is." In Spanish, you would say, "La cosa es que." Literally, "the thing is that." So that entire sentence would be, "La cosa es que es más complicado que eso." Again, the important thing to remember here is that conversation connector at the beginning. La cosa es que. This is great for introducing a new idea or giving helpful context. It's also great for helping you buy some time while you try to think of what to say next. If you memorize and practice la cosa es que, you can easily say that while you're actively trying to come up with a great way to say your alternative opinion. Okay, now let's say you want to change the subject altogether. For example, imagine they've spent too much time talking about this controversial topic. At this point, you'd rather move on and make plans for what to do today. In English, you might say, "Well, changing the subject, what do you want to do today?" In Spanish, the phrase for changing the subject is cambiando de tema, literally changing of topic. So in this context, you would say, "Bueno, cambiando de tema, ¿qué quieren hacer hoy?" These connectors are like conversation steering wheels. They help you change course without crashing the conversation. Our next connector is something you might use while you're planning the day. The connector is ¿por qué no? You'll use this when you want to make a suggestion. For example, maybe you want to suggest that you go to the beach with your in-laws today. In English, you might say something like, "Why don't we go to the beach?" In Spanish, this would be, ¿por qué no vamos a la playa? So this structure, ¿por qué no?, is incredibly useful. You can use it to make all kinds of suggestions, and it sounds super natural every time. To wrap up, let's cover 2 ways you can ask for clarification in Spanish. And everybody needs this, so even native speakers misunderstand things in Spanish mid-conversation. The difference is that if you're a fluent Spanish speaker, you know how to recover smoothly. So these 2 connectors will help you sound like a native speaker when you need to backtrack or ask for clarity. Let's say that someone's trying to tell you when something's going to happen, but you're not sure if they said martes or miércoles. In English, you could say something like, "Sorry, I didn't get that. When is the event?" Here's the Spanish equivalent of this sentence. Perdón, no entendí. ¿Cuándo es el evento? So remember the phrase, perdón, no entendí. And maybe that phrase is a little bit long for you, so let's learn an even simpler one. And it might surprise you. So let's imagine you didn't just mishear which day it was, you didn't understand a thing the person said. Maybe they spoke too fast, or maybe you're in a noisy place and you couldn't hear a thing. In English, sometimes we say, "What?" in these situations. But saying, "What?" is a little bit blunt. So in English, we sometimes soften this by saying, "What's that?" or "Come again?" In Spanish, to do this, native Spanish speakers usually just say, "¿Cómo?" And you might be thinking, wait, doesn't ¿cómo mean how, not what? So yes, ¿cómo literally means how. But this is the most common way that native Spanish speakers ask someone to repeat themselves. And you can use que in these situations, but it's not nearly as natural and polite or as common. So remember these 2 connectors that you can use to help keep the conversation going when you missed something or didn't understand what was said. All right, so we've covered a few of the most powerful conversation connectors in Spanish. If you start to use 1 or 2 of these every day, your conversations are going to feel smoother and more natural right away. But there are a lot more conversation connectors that you can use in even more situations, including correcting your own mistakes when you mess up in Spanish. To keep practicing the conversation connectors from this video and dozens more, you can download a set of free flashcards that include all of today's examples and plenty of new ones as well. The link is in the description of this video. All of these phrases were written by our native speaking coaches, so you'll be practicing true, authentic Spanish. And subscribe to this channel for more practice and study hacks that'll get you speaking Spanish fluently faster than ever.